Interview with Irene Rosenberg, daughter of Alfred Rosenberg. Question. Thank you for speaking with me. I understand you never talked to anyone about your father, so I am grateful you are sharing with me. Can I ask what you remember about Hitler? Irene. Yes, are a very lucky young man as I only share my experiences and thoughts with old comrades. What do I remember about the Fuhrer? You will understand I was very young like you. When I was born in 1930, I had very fond memories as a child, growing up around the inner circle, if you will. I remember he was very kind and jovial. My father took me to visit the Fuhrer often, and the Fuhrer even came to our home. I sat on his lap and read him a grim fairy tale book once, and he was impressed with my eloquent speaking. I met Gudrun at a party that was held just for the children during an important state function that we could not attend. He was always giving gifts like books, pastries, or candies. I remember that. The look on his face was always intensive listening. No matter what I was babbling, he always was attentive and humored me. As I grew older, I would see less and less of him. The last time was during the later stage of the war in Berlin. He asked me if I had a boyfriend yet and said with a tear in his eye he was sorry for the war. He was sorry the war turned out the way it had. He seemed to be apologizing for the world that would be left if we lost. That made such a deep impression on me. I will take it to my grave. It showed the deep love he possessed for our people. Therefore, while there are many who throw scorn on him today, I saw a great man who loved his people deeply and was deeply loved until forced Allied brainwashing changed that view in many. Question. What do you remember about your father? Irene. He was a very intelligent man who could debate with the best of them. He was a loving father and took care of mother and I. He encouraged me from an early age to express myself in any way I wanted to. So I like poetry. Here is a book he brought me to write in, and I had a typewriter that I used often. He taught me that National Socialism was life. It was nature. It was beauty, and all things beautiful. Those are things of poetry, life, and our Creator. When I was young, I remember he would come home from a day at the office. I would play with his cap and wear his boots. He would read bedtime stories, and later, when the war started, he would speak to me as a grown up to tell what was going on in the world and why Germany was fighting. This gave me comfort, as many were scared when Berlin had been bombed. I would then take those assurances to my friends in the neighborhood. He liked cooking with my mother often, making meals like in restaurants from around the world. He was partial to French and Russian dishes, sometimes with a German twist. We would have lively discussions at the table, everything from religion, history, to dance and poetry. I also learned a love of horses. He would take me to see some comrade steeds, and I was taught to ride. During his imprisonment, it was hard seeing my father. He had been tortured and humiliated by the Allied guards. I could see bruises and cuts on him where he had bled. The guards harassed me as if I did not equal a human. One soldier grabbed my ass so hard he bruised me badly. My mother was abused also. We wept for my father, knowing he was an innocent man being persecuted like the others. He was an early builder of the NSDAP, and the Fuhrer regarded him as a friend and teacher. Not many men can have that claim. Question. Do you believe your father was guilty of the crimes he was accused of? Irene. Absolutely not. I knew my father well. He was a very fair person who even spoke of the Jews in Berlin who were left alone as they posed no threat and obeyed the law. They say he ordered the killings of people in the East, but all I ever saw or heard was him extolling that we needed to treat them as friends and fellow Europeans. He was born in Estonia, in a German enclave where many Germans felt at home. He loved the peoples in the East. He was proud of the countless volunteers who helped us in the fight. I knew from dinner discussions that Jews were being moved east to get them out of Europe. However, it was clear orders were giving for them to be treated well. He commented at times that they must be careful not to offend or cause anger from those forced to move. I remember we even had a Jewish professor at our home who was worried about a friend being sent east. My father stopped this and allowed him to migrate to Sweden, even though he criticized the Fuhrer. My father would always send back gifts that people of the occupied territories would send him. If he were so bad, would the people give him gifts? He had many. During his time in the East, production rose, and he used German resources to help the Russians rebuild what their Marxist masters destroyed. He was even praised for reopening churches and paying for the rebuilding. Thousands upon thousands of Russian workers came to Europe, were given education, high paying jobs, and housing. How is that enslaving them? I know they had to claim this after the war to avoid being called collaborators who would face death. My father was a great man, super intelligent and loving. He was not guilty of anything that lying allies claimed. Many came to his defense after the war, but sadly, others turned on him. Irene, this is a hard subject to talk about. First, my father started out as anti Christian. This was manifested deeper when his first wife died. It was traumatic on him. He felt there was no proof of God and that it was weak to believe in one. While I will confess that I did not know every detail of my father's religious beliefs, I know he changed during the war, coming to believe Jesus was of Aryan blood. I will start by saying National Socialism is a European idea. Its basic beliefs are that we are tied to the laws of nature, and he who gave these laws to us. Old wisdom says the Bible has served Europeans for 2,000 years, as Jews rejected it. National Socialism wisdom says the Bible has become corrupted and taken over from its original design. This is why my father, and indeed others, took such a stance against the Bible as it is preached today. The message inside was used as weapons against our people to destroy racial ideas. As Gudrun knows, my father believed, her father believed as my father, and came to the same conclusion. The Bible may have been originally written about, to, and for a people called Israelites. This people has now been identified as Jews today. My father started to understand that perhaps these people, the Jews, who seem to bring hatred and evil wherever they go, might not be the same people in the Bible. He understood religion had turned into a weapon against us, and many naturally revolted against it. I never understood any of this when I was younger. It was only after it was all over I really started to research for what my father believed. I remember I was studying Luther and many others, but it raised more questions than answers. Like my father, I turned to studying original texts of the scriptures that were available. I always had to question if this is true, then how did it happen? There had to be a moment in time when this theft happened, but I could never find it. One day, I was reading 2 Kings when it hit me like a fist. The original Israelites were forced out of their lands and dispersed to what is now India, China, Iran, and Europe. Van and Irby found European mummies with light hair and eyes in these regions. The people who moved into the old lands were ancestors of the modern Jew, darker features from poisoned bloodlines. They were impressed by the technology and spirituality of the Israelites. So they wanted to adopt parts of their culture. And they brought in corrupt Israelite priests to teach them their ways. After time, these people usurped the identity of the old Israelites. As the dispersed ones lost their old ways, the Jews adopted new ways blended with their Talmud. Many years later, old Israelites started trickling back to the old lands. which were now under the control and influence of people who were not of Israelite blood. Christ came into this type of society, but his parents were of Israelite or Aryan blood. People tend to think today that since dark-skinned people inhabit these lands, that they were always there. This is false. Jews had a hand in translating some of the Bible when they came to Europe a few hundred years ago. They made sure words were changed, like the word Jew. It should be Judean, as it mostly describes anyone living in Judea, who at times could be any number of races. It has become probably the most confusing word in the Bible by the design of evil people. These scriptures have been translated so many times, error is inevitable, some of it on purpose. I will close this by saying my father was more anti-modern church, but had no desire to rid Germany of Christianity. The opposite is true. He knew this faith had become the bedrock of all European nations, and it was on this strength that we would be kept great. He only wanted to return to the true ways of Luther and the early church without any Jewish influence. Question: can I ask what the end of the war was like for you? Irene, how can I describe the terror, pain, and suffering I saw? We had to stay in Berlin as father's officers were there. I had to endure the bombings. We stayed mostly in our cellar, which was reinforced. There were times after a raid, the smell was horrid. I saw dead and wounded, and the screams still haunt me. These were women and children the Allies targeted. We evacuated Berlin upon the arrival of the Russians. The city was a shell of its former self. We moved into South Germany. The roads and rails were clogged with people of every nationality trying to get away from the evil that was coming. I met a Baltic family and spoke with them. They told of seeing Russian atrocities and warned me not to fall in their hands. We made it to the Allies, and at first we were treated okay. There was little to eat or drink, however. They tended to use our survival as a means for fornication. Many women had to endure this to feed their children. Evil had descended upon the people. When it was found out who we were, the Allies arrested my mother and I. We were insulted, groped, and threatened with every type of outcome you could imagine. I understand why many took their own lives and those of their children to avoid this. A guard was actually reprimanded as he told me if I slept with him, he would help me get away. I refused and spoke to the commander. Treatment then started to get a little better. However, the guards were still pigs and evil men. Their wives would be ashamed. We learned my father had been moved to a jail holding important people. We were finally allowed to be released, and I believe on Patton's orders. If I remember, he came to visit us and was appalled at how we were treated, ordering all family released and apologized for our treatment. We were not allowed to see father as we wanted to. He told me to be strong, and he had to meet his fate as a National Socialist, and would do so with honor and a clear conscience. He was adamant that the lies the Allies were telling would someday be destroyed. We wept on the day the victors of the war had their revenge on innocent men. It is a stain on those who turned traitor and agreed with the Allies' claims. I know they were only trying to save their skin, but they lost their honor forever. I, like all Germans, were forced to watch the Allied movies about the camps, and no one dared to speak the truth, as we knew what would happen. A woman was crying and having a breakdown after seeing one. No one had the courage to tell her these were propaganda films meant to justify the Allied war on us, and it would have brought a sentence of prison to do so. What do you think the future holds? Irene, every religion tells of a time when all that we know will end, and surprisingly, they all seem to agree it will be an uprising and then final judgment. Evil people and ideas will be exposed and destroyed. I see it starting to take shape now. The Jewish controlled press is promoting every sick idea, which is a good thing. We must be able to see who our enemies are. They are now coming out from behind closed doors. We will see in the future the clear line between who is good and who is not, who works for the natural health of his people, and who seeks to destroy the natural order. These lines will sometimes blur as the church will become more and more corrupt, but God's laws are on our hearts and will never be removed from everyone. His people will again someday come to see who they are. The church praises those very people seeking to destroy the very rock on which the church was built. This is foretold in the Bible. We took a new name, Christians, and Jews use our old. Someday the truth will be known for all to see, and there will be a terrible accounting for those who did this to us.